Hello again, it's me, Simon Holden, for the Bet Rivers Network for another edition of Ask the Handicapper. And today, the guest weekly on the Bet Rivers Network of Game, Set and Match, it's Sean Calvert. And I'm hoping, no pressure on Sean, that he's going to help me get back into betting on tennis because I have lapsed over the last few years and I'm keen to get back involved. So no pressure, Sean. Welcome to Ask the Handicapper. I hope you're well.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Now, Sean, you have worked for Betfair, the UK and I suppose the world's leading betting exchange. You've also worked for Unibet, CBS Sportsline. Our American viewers may have seen you on. And of course, now the Bet Rivers Network itself, which has led us to speak today. So just a little bit about your background for people and how long you've worked in tennis and why tennis, really.
Well, I took a bit of an unusual route into the betting industry, I suppose, if you want to call it that. I'm a trained journalist. I started working in sports journalism sort of around about 2005, doing things like match reports for football. I was a big West Brom fan. Did some stuff for their unofficial website, and then I did a bit of work experience at the Independent, and then I got a job in local media doing. I was covering Walsall Football Club for local media, so I was doing football writing, football journalism, and then Betfair came calling. I was already into betting at the time. I've always been into betting on and off, and I know about betting and always have done. And I was doing a bit of tennis betting, and I started writing a tennis betting blog. And as luck would have it, Betfair were looking for exactly that, a tennis betting writer. I applied, got the job, and that was that, really.
Excellent. And the rest is history.
Yeah.
Now, tennis, one of the few games, one of the world's greatest sports, but also one of the world's biggest sports betting sports, and is increasing and increasing. And Bet Rivers will come on to offering all sorts of markets on tennis, which I want to be plundering your knowledge about. But tennis, of course, is one of those rare games, Sean, which must have a result. So somebody has to walk off the winner, however long that takes. There is no draw. And of course, in betting purposes, there is no third outcome. Now, is that one of the things, do you think, that attracts, obviously, you and so many other people to tennis betting, the actual certainty?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, if you look at sports like football, you can know as much as you like about football, but if the referee gives a shocking 89th minute penalty decision against you, you've done your money and it's not your fault. You don't get any of that in tennis. The best guy wins. It's as simple as that. Obviously, the problem after that is deciding who the best man is going to be, and most importantly of all, if that person is a value bet. So I think that's the key message, I think, to get across when betting on tennis and at any sport, really. But as far as tennis is concerned, if you think a guy is going to beat another guy and you think his odds are bigger than they should be, then that's a bet. If you think a guy is going to beat another guy, but his odds are lower, then that's not a bet. That's the golden rule, really. That's the first rule to kind of always bear in mind.
Yeah. So the idea of value crosses every betting medium, doesn't it? And I want to start you off with a major tournament. Now, let's say Wimbledon, which of course we feel is the world's greatest tournament. Many of our viewers will cite Flushing Meadow, no doubt, as being their number one. How long before Wimbledon are you putting together your sort of portfolio of bets in the outrights? Would you bet anti-post on Wimbledon? Would you put together a strong array of outrights before you'd seen the draw, or would you hold back for the majority of your selections?
I think it's difficult on the men. I cover men's tennis, so it's probably different on the women's, where there's much more number of possible outcomes. In the men's tennis, lately, in the last sort of 10, 15 years, as you know yourself, it's been Djokovic, Federer, Nadal, occasionally Andy Murray, occasionally Stan Wawrinka back in the day. So that is majors aren't really somewhere that I would look for value, really, unless, as you say, you can see something a few months in advance, or maybe 6 months in advance. It kind of depends. Like last year, I was looking at Wimbledon, and I looked at Berrettini because he started playing really well in Madrid, which is one of the clay court tournaments played at altitude, so it's fast for a clay court tournament. He got to the final there, so he was obviously playing well, and on a surface that doesn't particularly suit him. But I was thinking, well, he's going to go well at Wimbledon. He's certainly got the game for it. He's shown he's in form. Wimbledon's about a month, probably 6 weeks away, 8 weeks away. Get on him now, and I got him at 66-1. He ended up getting to the final, lost to Djokovic in the final there. So I suppose in terms of Grand Slams, probably it could be a couple of months, it could be 3 or 4 months, it could be 6 months. If you're looking at the end of the season, sort of October, September, October, November time, and you're seeing someone coming into a little bit of form, but the season's going to end, then perhaps look at them to win the Australian Open in January. That's kind of how I do it in terms of the majors, although they're not my main sort of focus in terms of betting. I prefer the smaller tournaments, to be honest. You get much more unusual outcomes. The men's slams tend to be won by the world number 1, 2, or 3 generally. Yeah,
that's an interesting point, because of course my initial thing was to ask you about one of the big events, but of course if you get a 50-1 winner of the thinking of something rubbish, but I'm sure there are many, then that of course will pay you 50-1, just the same as the Wimbledon or Flushing Meadow.
You just get much better value, I find, in the smaller tournaments, because the bookmakers know everything there is to know about Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal and all these guys. What they don't know is the motivation of the top seeds. For example, this week in Munich, number 1 seed Zverev lost in the first round. Number 2 seed in Estoril also this week, Diego Schwartzman, didn't even turn up. So things like that, you can get value. That's a really good example. I mentioned on the Bet Rivers podcast, actually, when we previewed Estoril and Munich, I said Schwartzman probably wasn't going to turn up. So look for someone in that bottom half of the draw that's value. I went with Sebastian Baez, and he's still in it at the time of recording. So things like that, you can get value, which it's really hard to get that on the Grand Slams.
The motivation of everybody for those big, huge events is everybody's there, and the bookmakers know everything. The odds compilers know pretty much everything. I'm sure you can nick away the value, but you're right. Part of your success at the smaller tournaments then is asking yourself who's desperate to see themselves picking up the trophy on Sunday afternoon, and who thinks, well, there's always next week in San Francisco or whatever. So that angle of a smaller tournament is already something for people to really watch out for, to bring motivation into the front of your mindset of who you're picking. Now, we mentioned some of the big players. We are we have been in, frankly, a sort of bizarre period of domination for a small group of people. And I'm sure 15, 20 years ago, Sean, that this would never have been predicted, that the players would go on and on and on, and the same people would dominate these huge events and rack up these amazing careers of vast amounts of titles and wealth and just historic. Now, one discussion would be, has that been good for the game long term? But do you think it's been good for people looking to bet on these on men's tennis, the domination factor of a small group of players?
I think it depends on how you like to bet. A lot of people like the fact that they know what's going to happen. They like the fact that Nadal's probably going to win the French Open, and they don't mind putting a substantial amount of their betting bank on someone like Nadal at sort of even money, 4-6, 4-5, whatever he is, to win the French Open. And you can't really argue. It's proven quite profitable for them over the years if they've done that. If you know who's likely to be in the final, then that's a pretty good bet, I suppose, isn't it? It's not my sort of bet. I always look for value, which is why Grand Slams aren't generally my thing. But if you know that Djokovic, Nadal, Federer, they're going to be at the business end. They're almost guaranteed to be in the final. And you don't mind putting a substantial amount on them, then that's a good bet, isn't it? But it depends on your type of betting. It's not my type, but I know a lot of people would. They do like that. They like the sort of semi-certainty of knowing that they're going to get almost a guaranteed run for their money off these guys, and they're highly likely to get to the final.
Well, of course, the people who say, and as instinctive, both as a handicapper, but as a gambler, I am always looking in any sport to get favourites beat. Shorter the price, the more I will take them on. But people who back these guys who've racked up 3, 4, 5, years in a row, for instance, in the French, say, the people who back them at what I would consider prohibitive odds, they come out with the winnings on the Sunday evening, and it's the likes of me that are trying to get these people beat who have lost. So there is an argument, like you said,
for betting, trying to beat the bookmaker, trying to beat the odds.
Exactly. For the short price was still value. The Dreadford value was the high prices of the people who tried to get these guys beat, which is an interesting concept about long-term value plays. But as we've touched on them, if you could get a mythical match, and I suppose really out of these top players, who's the one who's, I suppose, your favourite in terms of the amount of times you've selected them? But if you could get a mythical matchup, say, where they were all on their dream surface, who is the best of the players in the last 10 years in your eyes?
It's a good question. I think it's so hard, isn't it? Because you've got three. You've got Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer. Who've all come at the same time. They've all beaten each other, on all the different surfaces. It's difficult because emotions come into it as well, don't they? You think to yourself, well, the sensible answer is Novak Djokovic. But I just find him so unlikable. I'm not sure I want to pick him. But I think you have to. I think you have to say, in terms of what he's done in the game, I think you just, out of those three, I think you probably just have to edge Djokovic, although I don't want to.
You see, Sean Calvert there through gritted teeth. Now, here's an interesting point, because again, there's an element of emotion then. You did come to that conclusion, but it was kind of with a heavy heart. There are various tennis betting forums that have said that in these top matchups, because nobody likes Djokovic, I'm being very generalizing there. Shall we say he's the least popular of the three?
That's true. I don't think anyone can argue about that.
Yeah. So he has been a value price more often because people have backed the other two against him in the hope that they will beat him. Because Roger Federer is so many people's favorite tennis player of all time. Now, do you think there could be an element of truth in that Djokovic, maybe people through gritted teeth have gone, well, I suppose he's likely to win. And of course, the idea is to win money. We can put our personal feelings aside once we've picked up the winnings and spent them, can't we? But could there be something in that?
Possibly. I just think with these big matchups, the Wimbledon finals, the US Open finals, the Masters Series finals, if it's going to be Djokovic, Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, these guys, as I alluded to earlier, the bookies just know too much about them.
Yeah.
And you don't get any real value from it. Sometimes it's 50-50, and then if you are having a bet, and then your heart might rule your head, and you might lean for Federer against Djokovic when you perhaps ought not to. But it's not the sort of match I would really want to bet on at all, because I don't know any more than the bookies do about those guys, because they see them as much as I do, and they probably know more. They've probably got people in their training camps, all sorts of stuff. People tell them about little injuries and little niggles in practice that we general punters don't know about. So it's not the sort of match that I would bet on, really, to be honest.
Yeah, so your first lesson to me is to stop obsessing about these top three and obsessing about the big tournaments, and concentrate more on smaller events where value can be gleaned. So I'll take that on board. Now, here's a question for you. Is the single most important aspect of any tournament or any tennis match not the players, but the surface that the game is played on?
Yes. If the surface, the conditions can be very, very, very different from week to week. If you've got a player, for example, this week in Munich, you've got a clay court tournament played at 500 meters of altitude. Generally speaking, for tournaments played at a high altitude, the balls fly quicker through the air, making all the conditions quicker, making everything faster. But you get a bit of rain in Munich quite often, pretty much all the time at this time of year. So that dampens the court as well. So you need to keep an eye on, particularly during the clay court season, which we're in now. You do have to keep an eye on the weather forecast. A lot of bettors will constantly, tennis bettors will constantly have their eyes on the satellite images of the forecast, because it's so important. And the other thing is that, particularly with clay and actually all surfaces on tennis, if you've got a delay in a match, if you've played half a dozen games or a set and a half, and you get a delay of an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, maybe a whole day, that changes a match dramatically. So conditions are very, very important, particularly at tournaments that don't have a roof, which is the vast majority of tournaments. If you've got a roof, well, even if a roof does actually change conditions slightly. So the conditions, so important,
And so, literally, you're scouring the weather reports. Now, by that definition, then, would you be happier with say the O2 Arena? Would you feel there's more consistency of your approach with an indoor event?
Yes. Even indoor events conditions can actually change depending on how many people are in there. If there's very few people in, it's colder. The players will say to you, it's colder. It's not as quick. If you've got a packed arena full of people screaming and shouting, it's hotter. It's warmer. The conditions will change slightly. Probably not as much as we could notice on TV, but for the players, things can change slightly. Conditions are. You just got to be on it constantly with conditions. Clay courts, for example, they'll play in the rain as long as it doesn't get too hard, and then that's a judgment call from the umpire in the tournament. They'll decide whether play has to be suspended or not. But they can play in the drizzle. So you've got to keep your eyes to the skies, keep your eyes on the satellite weather forecast, and you just got to be on it.
So as a bettor, in that sense, it's like with a lot of things, isn't it? You can't have too much information, can you, as part of your arsenal? Though it can get you dizzy sometimes to be looking at everything. It's that little nugget that you'll find in the sort of last bit of your preparation, isn't it, that can go, actually, this guy is a value player now because of the weather, because of blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so just be keeping your wits around about you. Now, here's a question I've always wanted to ask, and it is tennis related, not that. Okay. Is we hear we've got Sky Sports in America. They'll have various networks that will cover tennis regularly as well, and tennis can be on Amazon and all sorts of things. But one thing that's consistent in whoever I've watched broadcasting it is they will talk about a player having an easy route to the final. He hasn't dropped a set. He's won whatever. If it's the big, he's won 3-0, 3-0, 2-0, 2-0, whatever. And you get another guy in the draw who say, oh, he's had a much harder route. He's been involved in 3 or 4, 5 setters. Is a player's fatigue through an event a concern for you? Would it affect the outcome of a bet if player A has played, very few sets, and player B has come into it in lots of close, tough matches that could be physically sapping? Because, of course, tennis is one of those sports where, you beat the guy, you're involved in a real long, titanic struggle. You've got to come out again either the following day or the day after and do it again. There's no week off, is there? It's like out you go again. So is number of sets played for you something that would put you off a player, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, it's known as accumulated fatigue in tournaments. Yeah, that can be a big thing, particularly in Grand Slams where you've got, for example, Alexander Zverev. He used to go through the first 3 or 4 rounds of a Grand Slam. Every match was a 5-setter. By the time he got to the quarterfinals, he was knackered. So, you definitely have to bear that in mind. The problem with that, though, is that the bookies, they tend to price that in.
Yeah.
If a guy's play back-to-back 5-setters, they're gonna check that out, and they're gonna know that, and they're gonna price him bigger than he ought to be. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's not that hard. Sometimes it's not as clear cut as that. Sometimes a player might have played a 5-setter, but he's really, really fit. Someone like a David Ferrer back in the day, he used to play all day, and then he'd go out and practice because he hadn't played enough. It depends on the individual play. It comes back to something that's quite a key point in tennis betting, which is knowing your players, knowing their fitness levels. Sometimes you can't tell, obviously, but some players, when they've had enough. Someone like let's say someone like a Richard Gasquet, for example, getting towards the end of his career now. After he's had a couple of matches, if they're tight, he's not going to win the next round. It's just not going to happen. So it's personal knowledge of the players. The players that can handle these 5-setters. We've seen it time and again. Djokovic has come out and Nadal have come out after 5 hours in the semi-finals and been fresh as a daisy in the final. So it depends on the circumstances and on the player. But yeah, that can have a big effect. Yeah.
I suppose playing devil's advocate here, if someone's cruised through an event, like they said, he's had an easy way. I don't think there is an easy way to a final, but he's won easily. Hasn't lost his serval, and the other guy's been scrapping and fighting and edging his way in these long games. Maybe the guy could think one guy's not been tested yet or put under pressure, whereas the other guy will go, well, every time I've been asked and every time I've come out on top, I've done it 5 games in a row, now I'm at the final. So there could be that sort of gladiatorial aspect. But again, what you're saying is know the individuals involved as much about their careers and make a judgment on that in events, rather than having hard and fast rules about, I wouldn't play him because he was involved in a long game. If he's got a history of, like you say, coming out after long games and being fresh as a daisy, then maybe do follow them. So again, know your player.
That's what it's all about. It can happen. It's useful for you in every form of tennis betting, really. Knowing your player, knowing what their tendencies are, what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are. Are they likely to serve a match out at 5-4, or are their legs going to go and they're going to absolutely bottle it and it's not going to happen? Things like that. There's no substitute. It's very difficult to just come into a sport and be on it. You have to kind of be watching for some time, build up that knowledge of the players, or get it from other people, via Twitter or whatever. But it's so important to know what a player, or you can't know, but to have a pretty good idea of what they're going to do in every circumstance. There's so many hurdles that they've got to overcome to win a match. The main one, which is something that's tennis bettors will all talk about, is choking. That's who's going to choke serving a match out and who isn't, and that can either win you or lose you a substantial amount of money on tennis betting.
We're going to move on to in-running betting soon, but I just want to ask one more question, which is kind of linked to that, because we talked about psychology and knowing the players. What's often talked about is matchups. Player A has played player B 5 times over the previous 2 years on a variety of surfaces, blah, blah, blah. And it's 5-0, as they say. Would you be ever tempted to sort of break a run? Do you see what I mean? Do you bring in these matchups big into your factoring, or are you prepared to think, well, this guy's better than he was 6 months ago, whatever? So can somebody have somebody else's number, I suppose, is the question.
They can, but it doesn't always work out that way. You can take a number of examples. I think let's take Federer against Andreas Seppi and Tommy Robredo. I think Federer was something like 10-0 against Seppi and something like 8-0 against Robredo, and he lost to both of them in majors. He lost to Robredo, I think it was at the US Open, and the Australian Open, he lost to Seppi. So even if you've beaten a guy 10 times in a row, it doesn't mean you're going to beat him 11 times. So some of these head-to-heads, they can be really misleading. If you just look at the bare head-to-head and say, oh, this guy's beaten this guy 4 or 5 times, he's obviously going to beat him again. That's that's not the case. Some of these matchups can go back 5 or 6 years. You know, what a match played 6 years ago has very little relevance to today. And you need to really break those matches down as well. If you can look at 2 or 3 of them and say, well, that was when he was having that coming back from injury, or that was on a surface that he's not particularly, that was on clay, doesn't play well on clay. You have to take it in context. You have to really look back into your memory, or look it up, or find out somehow what's happened in those previous matches. Unless it's an obvious golfing class when this guy was way better than this guy, then in which case you're not going to get good odds anyway.
Yeah.
You need to really know what's happened in those matchups, and some of them will be completely irrelevant. The amount of times you've seen, there's another one, Fabio Fognini against Alias Bedene. I think he beat him 8 times in a row, Fognini. It's in straight sets, I think. The 9th time Bedene won. So it can be to your advantage, actually, knowing that when a player is likely to break a run like that. It could be when someone like a Federer is getting to the end of his career, and the other guy, all right, he's lost 7 or 8 times, but he's improving now. He's a different player to what he was 2 years ago. He's got a chance, and you'll get decent odds. So, yeah.
So the value could be with the sequence breaker rather than the guy who's winning the sequence. So that's an important thing to think about. Now, I want to ask you something, you as a tennis fan, and also as a tennis, I hope you're a tennis fan. I'm sure I certainly am again now, and also as somebody who writes and bets and talks about betting on tennis, which is your personal favorite surface to watch tennis, and which is your most successful surface to bet on tennis?
Most successful surface to bet on is grass. I for some reason I have a natural affinity with grass. I used to play as a kid on a grass court around the corner from my house. There was a council municipal grass court, like 5-minute walk from my house, and I was there every summer. And I'd play until it got dark. Me and my mates would just play the whole time. So grass has always been something that I've had an affinity with. I can sort of see how the shots are formed. I know what's going to happen on grass generally. Not always, obviously, but grass has always been a surface that I've always done really well on. In terms of betting, I can generally, it's a surface that's not natural to most players. Most players will only play on it a few weeks of the year. Most players, a lot of players, the clay courters in particular, they don't particularly want to play on it, but they will because there's money in it for them, and ranking points. So they do it under a sufferance. And you can look at, let's take someone like Tsitsipas, for example. Stefanos Tsitsipas has been extremely successful on every surface apart from grass, where he's been absolutely awful so far. And you could look at him and say, well, he's got very, very long back swings. It takes him, he's got that. He likes to have time on the ball, which he doesn't get on grass. So he's going to have to work extremely hard to make himself into a good grass court player. Little things like that you notice in a player's technique. You can say, well, he's not going to be any good on grass, or he is going to be good on grass. That's something that you can watch. You can learn by watching them play. So grass, my most successful. Clay, my least successful, because there's just so many changes in momentum in a clay match. It's a slower surface. You get way, way more breaks of serve. It's great for in-play trading. I don't normally bet on clay pre-match unless there's some clear value. If there's some clear value, then I'll go it and then trade in play on it. But trying to pick the result from the start of a clay match it's really difficult. I find grass quite straightforward. Clay, very difficult. Let's say that.
So this great sadness for you must be that your favourite surface is the one least played of all the so you've got that very narrow window of grass tournaments. But,
if it was on grass all year round, it'd be fine.
Yeah. I don't think our friends from Paris would welcome that as a suggestion, but
no, I don't welcome a lot of things.
No, that's another episode. So let's talk about in play, and of course, tennis betting is going all the time. BetRivers offering all sorts of markets, but the huge interest, surely, for many people now is in play betting. So, 2 or 3 Sean Calvert golden rules of in play tennis betting.
Well, it comes back to what we were saying about earlier. You need to find the value. And quite often, actually, you can get a little bit of value very, very soon into a match. For example, there was one the other day when Dan Evans was playing against Cressy, and he was a 1-3 favourite to start the match. Should have won that match all day long. He's a 1-3 favourite. He started out with 3 double faults, a couple of unforced errors. Before you know it, he's a breakdown. Now he's even money. So for me, that was a value bet because they left the court after the 2 games because of the rain.
Right.
So instead of being a 1-3 shot, Evans was now even money after just 2 games. So for me, the value that was there on Evans, as it happened, he made an absolute pig's ear of it, and he ended up losing the match. Yeah. But the value that's kind of irrelevant in a way because the value was there.
Yeah.
And you can in play you can get that quite quickly, particularly on clay. Not so much on grass where you tend to get a lot of service holds, but on clay, that I'd say first of all, I'd say clay is the best surface for in play without a doubt. If you want to do some in play betting, do it on clay because there are so many twists and turns, and it can happen quite quickly. Like I said, your player could be, you might be wanting to back a player, and he's 4-6, and you think, well, I'd like evens or 11-10 if possible. You might get that within 10 minutes, and then you've got yourself a value bet. So, yeah, looking at the prices, knowing the price that you want to get involved with that player, you might get it or you might not. If you don't get it, then don't do it. But you might get it very early. You might get a break a serve, and the market will overreact, and then you've got yourself a value bet. So that's one strategy that's very useful on clay. Can
I just interrupt there, Sean, because I wanted to really drill down on that, something you just said. When a market overreacts. Now, I was reading an article recently, and it's a while ago, but there were some bookmakers that were betting in running in Britain at the time, and it was about the Nadal-Federer Wimbledon final, which many regard as the greatest tennis match of all time, although that there's a hot debate, when Nadal beat Roger Federer.
Yeah.
And I believe was around 3-1, 11-4 in the outright. But the article was about the amount of times during that 5-set ultimate thriller, both players switched favoritism. And I think, if I'm correct, and I think I'm correct on this, it happened 7 times during that match where favoritism switched. Now, obviously, that meant with no draw, people could possibly, well, not possibly, some people were able to get on both players at odds against and guarantee a profit. So that isn't going to happen every day, is it? But you talked about a target price if I could get even money. So you give yourself a kind of like, you draw a line under a name and say, right, if this guy touches even money or say odds against, I'll get involved. But then there could be an occasion where the other guy in the same game goes to that. Would you stick or twist, or would you always take a guaranteed profit?
I tend to do quite high risk, low stakes. High risk is generally how I would bet. So I tend to go for big odds in play. If, for example, in a clay court tournament, if someone's serving for a set, you know, the one break up, let's say the 5-4 up serving for the set, I'll probably wait till they're about, I don't know, 30 love or 30-15, and then I'll back the other guy to win the set. Because it so often, it's not going to happen every time. You got to be patient. It's not going to happen every single time. But the amount of times that it does happen, particularly on clay, if someone's serving for a set, that I wouldn't say they were anywhere near guaranteed. Depends who they are, obviously. But I wouldn't say they're anywhere near guaranteed to serve a set out. So I will tend to wait and say, even with a 40-15 up on clay, then if I fall 40-15 up, they're not guaranteed to win that set by any means. And you might get 16-1, 20-1, 25-1 on that player winning the set. All they've got to do is win a couple of points, get it back to juice. They turn that game around and it's 5-5, and then it's not far off even money, and you've got yourself a 16-1, 20-1, 25-1 bet, which is now an even money shot. So that I mean, it's high risk, obviously, but if you're doing it on low stakes, it doesn't really matter. But that's the kind of thing that I would look for on clay, particularly because swings of momentum. That's another big thing in tennis betting. It can happen so often. Like you said, with Federer and Nadal, that was on grass, and he got all those swings of momentum. You know, imagine on clay. Happens all the time.
So take yourself out of the individual point and be aware of that. You know, this is a match that could last another couple of hours. I suppose would be one of the lessons, isn't it? Like you say, and if you're going to play at higher stakes, you don't have to be right that often to come out with a decent profit. Whereas if you're going to play short in the market, you better be ready to get some big sequences going of being right, or you're going to lose your stack. Now, we've given us some excellent points here, and you've already convinced me that this is a sport I need to come back to, Sean. So it would be remiss of us before we close to not ask you for a name that the Bet Rivers Network viewers should look out for. Now, it might be on a particular surface. It might be you've targeted somebody for a certain event. But I suppose what I'm asking is, who is better than both the tennis public and the bookmakers think at the moment? Which player can we get some value from in the coming months?
Well, the player that's just starting to show some potential now, Holger Rune. We're probably about a day too late. He's just beaten Alexander Zverev in Munich, and he's a player he's been benefiting from a lot of wild cards in the last sort of 12 months, and he wasn't doing it because he's a young player, very young player, but he's had a heck of a lot of valuable experience from those wild cards, and now he's starting to. This is on clay. I haven't seen him on it. I haven't actually seen him play on many other surfaces. He's very much a clay orientated player from Denmark. He's really started now. We're obviously in the clay season, so it's relevant for right now. He might even have a little run at the French Open. Everyone's talking about Alcaraz at the moment. There's obviously no value in him now because we're talking about him as if he's like a 35-year-old. He's not even 19 yet. I think he's 19 next week or something. So everyone's talking about Alcaraz, but absolutely no value in him at all now. It's almost worth opposing him now because he's that well known. Rune's just coming through. Maybe that win over Zverev will have made the bookies wake up to him, but he's doing really well. The other one that's doing really well that might just be interesting on grass, certainly on hard courts, but I think grass as well. Miomir Kekmanovic. He was a former world junior number 1. It's been kicking around on the senior circuit for a few years now. He's had a few highs and lows, but in the last couple of months, last 2 or 3 months, he's really started to look like he might actually fulfill the potential that he showed as a junior. I think he might go well on the grass. He's even done well on slower hard courts and clay in recent months, but I think he's better suited to a quicker surface. So and the grass tournaments on the build up to Wimbledon, I'd be having a look at Kekmanovic. He's playing well.
So there we are, folks. A couple of names to conjure with in the coming months. Well, thank you, Sean. And also, folks, of course, you can hear Sean's views alongside Nigel Seeley on Game, Set and Match, the weekly Bet Rivers Network podcasts about tennis and all things tennis betting. So Bet Rivers offer so much choice and so many tennis markets. We've given some rules. To bring and crystallize some. I think the first thing to take away is to know the players and get as much information as you can. Be careful of those markets which could have moved too quick when just a couple of points have been in a game or a set, and go for the value. And I suppose the thing I did wrong, first of all, Sean, is to focus and ask about the majors when, of course, you are concentrating on getting the wins in those minor events where the bookmakers might not know as much as you, whereas in those big Grand Slams, they know every single thing about those top boys. And you will do well to beat them, but they can be beat. So thank you, Sean. And I wish you continued success, and I hope you're enjoying the Bet Rivers Network podcast. And who knows, in a few months, we may even reconvene to see how I've been getting on. So thanks a lot, Sean.
Cheers.
Bye for now, everybody. See you again soon on Ask the Handicapper.